Time carves different patterns into those who survive war. Some men build empires from their scars, others forge weapons. In the quiet darkness of a private library overlooking San Francisco Bay, an old journal falls. Its pages contain battlefield innovations born of desperation, medical miracles improvised under mortar fire 4 decades ago. Two survivors of that hell, once brothers in blood, now stand on opposite sides of humanity's next evolution. One seeks redemption through healing, the other, control through connection. Some knowledge was never meant to be possessed. Some doors in the mind were never meant to be opened. When technology can bridge broken minds, who decides which bridges to build and which to burn? The past and future collide in a race that will determine whether the next leap in human consciousness becomes our greatest salvation or our final surrender. In the silence between heartbeats, the oldest questions echo. What makes us human, and how much of that are we willing to sacrifice? The leather-bound journal fell with a soft thud onto the polished oak floor. Eleanor Mitchell froze, her hand still extended toward the space on the shelf where the book had been. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into eternity in the vast private library of Riverview Estate. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco Bay sparkled under the April sun, indifferent to her predicament. "Damn it," she whispered, kneeling to retrieve the journal, her knees protesting after hours of cataloging. At 58, Eleanor wasn't old, but the body kept its own scorecards of time. The journal had fallen open, revealing handwritten notes in a precise, almost surgical script. Medical terminology mingled with location names she recognized immediately: Pleiku, Da Nang, Khe Sanh, Vietnam. The margins contained sketches of makeshift operating theaters, wounded soldiers, and improvised medical devices. Her trained eye, honed by 20 years as a medical history professor at UCLA, recognized the significance immediately. These weren't just memories. They were medical innovations born of desperation. "I believe that belongs to me." The voice, deep and cold as a winter ocean, came from the library entrance. Eleanor didn't need to look up to know who it was. Jonathan Everett, billionaire CEO of Everett International, owner of this mansion and everything in it, including, for all practical purposes, her time and expertise for the next year. She stood slowly, journal in hand, facing him with the poise of a woman who'd weathered too many storms to be easily intimidated. "Mr. Everett, I apologize for the intrusion. The journal was misshelved with the historical medical texts." She kept her voice professional, neutral. Jonathan Everett, at 65, cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair and the kind of posture that spoke of military discipline never forgotten. His face might have been handsome once, before life had carved its history into it with an unforgiving chisel. Now it was a landscape of experience, deeply etched lines around steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. He crossed the room with measured steps, the subtle limp in his right leg barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Eleanor was. She'd done her research before accepting this position. "Those are private records, Ms. Mitchell, not part of your cataloging assignment." He extended his hand for the journal, his expression unreadable. "Of course." She handed it over, but couldn't stop herself from adding, "Though your field surgical techniques from Pleiku would be valuable additions to any modern combat medicine curriculum." His eyes narrowed, reassessing her. "You recognize the procedures." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "My late husband was a field surgeon in Desert Storm, and before I was let go from UCLA, I taught the evolution of battlefield medicine from the Civil War through Afghanistan." Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps respect before the professional mask slid back into place. "That explains why Dr. Harrison recommended you so highly for this position." He tucked the journal under his arm. "Nevertheless, my personal papers are off limits." "Understood." She paused and then added, "Though I should mention that your current organizational system for the medical texts is inefficient, the chronological arrangement ignores thematic connections and practical applications. I could—" "You were hired to catalog, Ms. Mitchell." not reorganize. Eleanor met his gaze. At 58, with a career dismantled by university budget cuts and a life reshaped by personal tragedy, she learned when to bend and when to stand firm. With respect, Mr. Everett, you hired me for my expertise. If you wanted someone to simply record what's here, you could have hired any graduate student for a third of what you're paying me. A tense silence stretched between them. Outside, a ferry horn sounded across the bay, mournful and distant. Finally, his lips curved in what might generously be called a smile. You've been here 3 days, and you're already challenging how I organize my own library. 4 day, she corrected. And yes, for a moment, she thought she'd overstepped. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed a short, rusty sound, as if from long disuse. Very well, Miss Ord Mitchell. Email me your proposed reorganization plan by Friday. If it has merit, you may proceed. He turned to leave, then paused. And Ms. Mitchell, yes, next time you find something of mine that's misshelved, please return it directly to me. After he left, Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Through the window, she watched him walk toward the cliffside path that led to the main house, his tall figure silhouetted against the bay. What kind of man collected thousands of rare medical texts, but kept his own wartime innovations hidden away? What was he building in those research labs across the bay that required such specialized historical knowledge? And why did she feel, despite the tension of their encounter, that she just passed some test she hadn't known she was taking? The alarm sounded at 2:17 a.m., piercing the silence of Eleanor's cottage on the Riverview estate grounds. She woke instantly, the old habit of a mother whose son had served 3 tours in conflict zones. The harsh electronic wail wasn't her phone or clock. It was coming from outside. She moved to the window in time to see emergency lights flashing near the estate's private laboratory, a sleek, modern structure that stood in stark contrast to the historic main house. Without thinking, she grabbed her robe and slipped on shoes. The night air bit through the thin fabric as she hurried down the path. The lab's security door was ajar, smoke billowing from inside. No security personnel were visible, unusual for a facility that normally required retinal scans just to approach the entrance. Mr. Everett, she called, approaching cautiously. No response. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before pushing the door wider. Inside, emergency sprinklers had activated, soaking everything in sight. Through the haze and water, she spotted Jonathan Everett on the floor near an equipment console that was sparking dangerously. 15 years of volunteering at VA hospitals after her husband's death had prepared her for emergency response. She grabbed a lab coat from a hook by the door, covered her mouth and nose, and moved toward him. Mr. Everett, can you hear me? He was conscious but dazed, a gash across his forehead bleeding freely. Behind him, a prototype device, something that looked like a cross between an MRI machine and a robotic surgical assistant, was in flames. The data, he coughed, pointing toward a workstation. External drive. Need to save it. Eleanor made a split-second decision. Stay still. I'll get it. She navigated through fallen equipment to the workstation, located the external drive, and disconnected it. The ceiling groaned ominously above them. We need to move. Now. She helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they stumbled toward the exit. They had barely cleared the building when a secondary explosion rocked the lab, sending a fireball into the night sky. They collapsed onto the manicured lawn, gasping for breath. In the distance, sirens wailed. External drive, Jonathan managed between coughs. Eleanor patted her robe pocket where she'd secured it. Safe. He studied her with new intensity. You didn't hesitate, running into a burning building. She shrugged, suddenly conscious of her soaked nightclothes and wild gray-streaked hair. I've pulled wounded men from worse situations in Desert Storm triage units. You were in Desert Storm, volunteer civilian medical staff, where I met my husband. She didn't add that it was also where she learned that sometimes running toward danger was easier than waiting helplessly for news. Jonathan tried to sit up, wincing. Eleanor gently pushed him back down, her hands automatically checking his pulse and pupils. "You have a concussion, Mr. Everett, and that cut needs stitches. Please don't move until the paramedics arrive." He ignored her, attempting to rise again. "I don't need, with respect, sir. Shut up and lie still before you make it worse." He stared at her in surprise, then, remarkably, complied. As the wail of approaching emergency vehicles grew louder, Eleanor used the hem of her robe to apply pressure to his head wound. "The prototype," when she asked, nodding toward the burning lab. His expression darkened. "Destroyed. 2 years of work. But not the data. No. Thanks to you." He studied her face. "Why did you come?" The question seemed to ask more than its simple words. Eleanor considered her answer carefully. "Because someone needed help," she said finally. "And I've spent too many years in emergency rooms to run the other way." Something shifted in his gaze, a reassessment, a new calculation. "I misjudged you, Miss Mitchell." "Most people do," she replied. "I'm accustomed to it." The paramedics arrived then, swarming around them with practiced efficiency. As they loaded Jonathan onto a stretcher, he caught her wrist. "The drive. Don't give it to anyone. Not security, not my assistant, no one." The intensity in his eyes startled her. "What's on it?" "Hope," he said cryptically. "And possibly the reason someone just tried to kill me." 3 days after the lab explosion, Eleanor found herself in the administrative heart of Everett International's downtown San Francisco headquarters. The gleaming skyscraper embodied the company's status as a leader in medical technology, all curved glass and surgical steel, with a 40-foot vertical garden in the lobby that somehow managed to feel both sterile and vibrant. She felt distinctly out of place in her sensible navy pantsuit among the sleek executives. The security badge clipped to her lapel identified her merely as library sciences consultant, raising curious eyebrows from staff as a young assistant named Tyler escorted her to the executive floor. "Ms. Mitchell?" Margaret Winters, Jonathan's executive assistant for over 20 years, greeted her with professional warmth. The older woman's silver-framed glasses and immaculate gray suit radiated competence. "Mr. Everett is expecting you. He's asked that you use discretion regarding the incident." "Of course." Margaret lowered her voice. "He rarely brings outsiders into company matters. Whatever you did to earn his trust, I'm grateful. He's been carrying too much alone." Before Eleanor could respond, the assistant pressed a button, and the walnut doors to Jonathan's office swung open. The office was predictably impressive corner views of the bay, modernist furniture, and walls adorned with patents rather than the expected artwork. Jonathan stood by the window, his back to her, a bandage still visible at his temple. He turned as she entered, his expression guarded. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Given that you've arranged a company car and security escort, I didn't have much choice." She set her purse down. "Is there news about the explosion?" "Officially, it was an equipment malfunction during an unauthorized after-hours test." He gestured for her to sit. "Unofficially, someone tampered with the coolant system and power regulators. It was meant to destroy everything in that lab, including me." Eleanor absorbed this. "You believe it was corporate espionage. I believe someone wants my research badly enough to kill for it." He placed a tablet before her. "The drive you saved contained the algorithm for neural pathway regeneration in traumatic brain injuries, the cornerstone of Project Lazarus." She raised an eyebrow at the name. "My late wife's idea," he explained. She had a sense of the dramatic. "I'm sorry for your loss," Eleanor said automatically. 15 years ago. His tone made it clear the subject was closed. "What I need now is someone I can trust to help me identify who's trying to sabotage my work. Someone without existing loyalties within the company." "And you think that's me, a librarian you barely know?" a medical historian with high-level security clearance from her time working with military hospitals, a woman with no connections to my competitors, someone who ran into a burning building to save data before she even knew what it was. He leaned forward. I've had you thoroughly vetted. Ms. Mitchell, your integrity is unusual in my world. Eleanor considered her position carefully. She needed this job. Her savings had dwindled during 2 years of unemployment after UCLA's restructuring, and her son Michael's medical work in conflict zones required occasional financial support. She was determined to provide without his knowledge. But corporate intrigue and potential danger hadn't been in the job description. What exactly would this entail? Continue your work in the library as cover, but I'll also give you access to project files and research data. You'll report directly to me if you notice anything suspicious, inconsistencies, unauthorized access, unusual inquiries about the project. I'm not a security expert or corporate investigator. No, you're something more valuable, someone with fresh eyes who understands both the historical context of medical innovation and recognizes when something doesn't add up. He paused. I'm offering an additional compensation package. Of course. He named a figure that made Eleanor blink. That's generous. It's fair compensation for increased risk and responsibility. His expression remained unreadable. Do we have an agreement? Eleanor thought of the external drive hidden in her cottage, of the desperation in his voice when he'd asked her to protect it. Whatever this project was, it mattered to him beyond corporate profits. I'll help, she said finally, but I want complete transparency about what I'm getting involved with. No more surprises. Fair enough. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Margaret, please bring in the Lazarus files for Ms. Mitchell and schedule her for full security clearance processing. After Margaret delivered a sealed folder and departed, Jonathan's demeanor shifted subtly. There's something else you should know. He moved to a hidden panel in the wall, revealing a safe. From it, he withdrew a file marked with military insignia. The technology we're developing has attracted attention beyond our competitors, including government agencies and certain private military contractors. Eleanor felt a chill. What exactly is Project Lazarus? It began as an attempt to develop technology that could have saved my wife. His voice remained steady, but Eleanor caught the undertone of old grief. Caroline was in a car accident, severe traumatic brain injury. By the time they got her to surgery, the damage was irreversible. He spread photographs on the desk, prototype designs, brain scans, neural mapping diagrams. Over the past 15 years, I've developed a system that can map neural pathways in damaged brain tissue and stimulate regeneration using nanobots guided by AI. In early trials, we've restored cognitive function in patients previously considered beyond recovery. Eleanor examined the technical specifications with growing amazement. This could revolutionize treatment for stroke victims, TBI patients, even certain neurodegenerative conditions. Yes, but it has other applications that make it valuable to military interests. Battlefield medicine, enhanced interrogation resistance, even potential cognitive enhancement. His expression darkened. I've refused to weaponize this technology, which has complicated certain relationships. You think someone with military connections is behind the sabotage. I think there are multiple parties interested in acquiring or destroying my research. What I don't know is which one has infiltrated my company. He fixed her with an intense gaze. That's where you come in. Eleanor was about to respond when a notification pinged on Jonathan's computer. His expression changed as he read the message. We have a problem. Security just reported an unauthorized access attempt on the main server. Someone inside the building is trying to download research files. He grabbed his phone, barking orders to security while pulling up surveillance feeds on his monitor. Eleanor caught glimpses of the underground parking garage, where security personnel were converging. Stay here, Jonathan instructed, heading for the door. Margaret will secure the office. But please, Eleanor, I need someone I trust to remain with these files. It was the first time he'd used her first name. Something in his tone made her nod in agreement. After he left, Eleanor found herself alone with the classified materials. Against her better judgment, she began reviewing them more thoroughly. The technical specifications were brilliant, but it was the patient case files that captured her attention, especially the military applications testing. One photo stopped her cold, a young soldier with injuries disturbingly similar to those her son Michael had described treating in field hospitals. The resemblance to her late husband was uncanny. She was so absorbed that she almost missed the sound of the office door opening, expecting Margaret. She looked up with a start. The man who entered wasn't security or staff, tall and distinguished, with silver-streaked dark hair and an expensive suit. He carried himself with military bearing despite his age, which she guessed to be close to Jonathan's. "Ms. Mitchell, I presume," his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Victor Harrington, Chief Technology Officer. I see Jonathan has brought you into his confidence." Eleanor closed the file casually, her instincts suddenly alert. "Mr. Harrington, I wasn't aware anyone else had access to Mr. Everett's office during security protocols. Executive override." He gestured to the files. "Fascinating reading. Isn't it Jonathan's obsession for 15 years? His attempt to rewrite his greatest failure?" There was something in his tone, something that made Eleanor slide the external drive deeper into her pocket. "I wouldn't characterize saving lives as an obsession," she replied carefully. Harrington's laugh was cold. "You don't know him very well yet. Jonathan doesn't care about saving lives, he cares about saving one life. Too bad he's 15 years too late." Before Eleanor could respond, the door burst open again. Jonathan entered, his expression hardening when he saw Harrington. "Victor, I wasn't aware you'd returned from Washington." "Clearly," Harrington's smile was razor thin. "I came as soon as I heard about the lab incident. Such a tragedy, all that irreplaceable research." The tension between the men was palpable. Eleanor found herself holding her breath. "Fortunately," Jonathan said coldly, "backups exist." "How providential." Harrington's gaze shifted to Eleanor, assessing. "And now you've found a new confidant. Always a weakness of yours. Jonathan trusting too easily. Did you need something specific?" "Victor, we're in the middle of a security situation. Just checking on an old friend. We've been through too much together to stand on ceremony, haven't we?" He moved toward the door, then paused. "Ms. Mitchell, a word of advice from someone who's known Jonathan since Vietnam: be careful what secrets you choose to keep for him. Some of them bite." After he left, Eleanor released a breath. "I take it you two have history?" "Vietnam. We served in the same MASH unit." Jonathan's expression was grim. "Victor was a brilliant surgeon. Saved my life after I stepped on a mine." He gestured to his right leg. "But war changes people in different ways. And now he's your CTO. Keep your friends close," Jonathan murmured. "And your enemies closer," Eleanor finished. "Which is he?" Jonathan met her gaze directly. "That's what I need to find out. And quickly." He moved to the window, looking out over the city he'd helped shape with his innovations. The security breach was coordinated. Someone downloaded partial specs for the neural interface, while another team member created a diversion in the garage. Did they catch anyone? No. But they left this. He handed her a security badge. "It belongs to my daughter, Catherine." Eleanor studied the ID card, noting the Westmoreland Corporation logo, Everett International's largest competitor. "Your daughter works for your competition." "My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 5 years." His voice was devoid of emotion. "Since she blamed me for not using experimental treatments to save her mother treatments that didn't exist yet. Now she's marketing director at Westmoreland and apparently involved in corporate espionage against her own father." The bitterness in his voice made Eleanor wince. She thought of her own complicated relationship with Michael, how they loved each other deeply but struggled to communicate across the gulf of his military service and her civilian perspective. "Perhaps there's another explanation," she suggested. "If someone wanted to frame her, Catherine has access codes and intimate knowledge of our security systems from growing up in the company. She's brilliant, resentful, and well-positioned to damage everything I've built." He turned back to face her. "And now she may have put lives at risk for corporate gain." "What will you do?" His expression was bleak. "What's necessary to protect the project? Starting with moving the remaining research to a secure location." He gathered the files. "I'd like you to accompany me, after hours, through the private entrance. The fewer people who know about this, the better." Eleanor hesitated. "Mr. Everett Jonathan, I'm still not clear on my role here. I'm a historian, not a security consultant or corporate spy. You're someone with no existing loyalties or conflicts within this situation. Someone who understands both the medical significance of this work and recognizes patterns others might miss." He paused. "And you're someone who's already proven willing to risk your safety for something you believe matters." Put that way, Eleanor found it difficult to refuse. She nodded slowly. "I'll help, but I want regular updates on the investigation. And if at any point I feel the risk outweighs the benefit, you can walk away. No repercussions." He extended his hand. "You have my word." As she shook his hand, Eleanor couldn't help wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. But something about Jonathan Everett's quest resonated with her, perhaps because she recognized the look of someone trying to atone for a past they couldn't change. She'd worn that expression herself for 15 years, ever since she'd sent her husband off to his final deployment with angry words she could never take back. Some debts could never be repaid, but that didn't stop people from trying. The San Francisco docks at sunset were a study in contrast. Luxury yachts bobbing alongside industrial fishing vessels. Tourist ferries returning from Alcatraz as container ships prepared for trans-Pacific journeys. Eleanor pulled her jacket tighter against the evening chill as she made her way along Pier 39, trying to look like any other tourist enjoying the waterfront. The text message from an unknown number had been specific. "Storage Unit 47, Bayside Maritime. Come alone. Proof of inside man." No signature, but the reference to their investigation left little doubt it concerned Everett International. Jonathan had wanted to come himself, but a last-minute board meeting made that impossible. Eleanor had convinced him she could handle a simple reconnaissance, a decision she was beginning to regret as darkness fell and the crowds thinned. Bayside Maritime Storage occupied a shabby warehouse at the less picturesque end of the wharf. Eleanor checked her watch, 7:45 p.m. The facility closed at 8:00. A board attendant barely glanced at the visitor pass Jonathan had arranged. "Unit 47 is on the far side. Ma'am, we lock up in 15 minutes. The cavernous warehouse smelled of salt, diesel, and mildew. Motion-activated lights clicked on as Eleanor navigated through rows of storage units. Most contained boat equipment or shipping materials, but some were padlocked with expensive security systems that seemed excessive for marina storage. Unit 47 stood open, its rolling door raised about 3 feet from the ground. Eleanor crouched to peer inside, then froze at the sound of voices approaching from the opposite direction. "Transfer the data tonight." "The old man's getting suspicious." The voice was male, vaguely familiar. "What about the librarian he's got sniffing around?" A woman this time, her tone dismissive. "Leave her to me. She's a complication we don't need." Eleanor's heart pounded. She needed to see their faces. Pulling out her phone, she opened the camera app and carefully positioned it to capture the approaching figures while remaining hidden behind a stack of crates. The man came into view first, Victor Harrington, looking far less polished than he had in Jonathan's office. He wore casual clothes and carried a hard-shell briefcase. The woman beside him was younger, perhaps 40, with sharp features and expensive highlights in her dark hair. Eleanor zoomed in, snapping several photos before ducking back behind cover. She waited until their footsteps passed, then peered around the crate. They were entering a unit about 20 yards ahead, their backs to her. This was her chance. She slipped into Unit 47, finding it empty, except for a single manila envelope on the floor. She grabbed it and retreated, intending to examine its contents somewhere safer. She'd made it halfway to the exit when an alarm blared through the warehouse. Red emergency lights began flashing, and a computerized voice announced, "Security breach detected. All exits securing in 60 seconds." Eleanor broke into a run, cursing under her breath. She rounded a corner and nearly collided with Harrington, who looked as surprised as she felt. "Ms. Mitchell," he recovered quickly, his expression hardening. "What an unexpected pleasure." "I was just leaving," she managed, backing away. His gaze dropped to the envelope in her hand. "With something that doesn't belong to you, it seems." "Security breach in Section C," the automated system announced. "Containment protocols activated." Harrington's companion appeared behind him, her hand moving inside her jacket in a way that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "We have a problem." "Victor," the woman said. "We have a solution," he corrected, stepping toward Eleanor. "Ms. Mitchell was just about to hand over that envelope and forget she ever saw us here." Eleanor calculated her options limited and uninspiring, but her years teaching self-defense to nurses in war zones hadn't been wasted. When Harrington reached for her arm, she was ready. The self-defense move was simple but effective, a sharp strike to the solar plexus, followed by a sweep of his legs. Harrington went down with a startled oath. The woman shouted and reached into her jacket, but Eleanor was already running, zigzagging between storage units. Behind her, she heard Harrington shouting and the distinctive sound of a gun being cocked. The exit was still 100 yards away, with minimal cover between. A storage unit to her right stood open. Eleanor ducked inside, crouching behind stacked kayaks as footsteps approached. "She can't have gone far," the woman's voice. "Check every unit." Eleanor's phone vibrated a text from Jonathan. "Where are you? Meeting ended early." She typed quickly. "Bayside Maritime? Trap. Harrington involved. Armed." She pressed send, then silenced the phone. The methodical opening and closing of storage units grew closer. Eleanor looked around desperately for another exit or weapon. The unit contained mostly recreational equipment, kayaks, paddles, life vests, fishing gear, including a spear gun. She reached for it just as a shadow fell across the unit's entrance. "Found you," the woman said. Gun raised. Eleanor fired the spear gun without hesitation. It wasn't loaded with a spear, but the compressed air release was enough to startle the woman and knock her aim off. The gunshot went wide, punching through a kayak inches from Eleanor's head. Eleanor charged forward, using the spear gun as a club. They crashed into the aisle together, the gun skittering away in the struggle. "Victor," the woman shouted, grappling with Eleanor. "She's here." Eleanor broke free and sprinted toward the exit. The envelope clutched tightly in her hand. The main doors were closed, but a side entrance used by staff remained ajar. She burst through it onto the loading dock, the cool night air hitting her like a wall. Behind her, the door crashed open again. Eleanor raced down the pier, searching frantically for cover or help. The tourist areas were too far. She'd never make it before they caught her. A familiar voice called from the water. "Eleanor here." Jonathan Everett stood in a sleek speedboat idling beside the pier, his expression tense. Without hesitation, Eleanor vaulted the railing, landing awkwardly in the boat as gunfire erupted behind her. Jonathan gunned the engine, the powerful craft leaping forward like a startled animal. Bullets sprayed the water around them as they accelerated away from the dock. "Are you hit?" Jonathan demanded, navigating through the harbor traffic with surprising skill. Eleanor checked herself, adrenaline masking any pain she might feel. "No, I don't think so. How did you GPS tracking on company phones?" He spared her a quick glance. "Standard protocol for all employees with security clearance." "That's invasive," she managed, still catching her breath. His smile was grim. "And apparently necessary. What happened in there?" Eleanor explained her discovery of Harrington and his companion, showing him the photos she'd managed to capture. "That's Diane Westmoreland," Jonathan said grimly, studying the image. "CEO of Westmoreland Corporation and my late wife's sister. Your sister-in-law is working with your CTO to steal your research. So it seems. His expression was unreadable as he navigated the boat into a private marina north of the city. What's in the envelope? Eleanor had almost forgotten it in the chaos. She opened it carefully, finding several photographs and a USB drive. The photos showed Jonathan's daughter, Catherine, meeting with various people, some in military uniform, others in business attire. One image showed her in what appeared to be a heated argument with Victor Harrington. These don't look like evidence against Catherine, Eleanor observed. More like someone was monitoring her. Jonathan studied the images, his brow furrowed. This man here, he pointed to a uniformed officer. That's General William Blackwood, Department of Defense Advanced Research, and this, another photo, Senator Collins, Armed Services Committee. Why would your daughter be meeting with military officials? I don't know. Jonathan's voice was troubled. But these photos were meant to lead us to a specific conclusion about Catherine. The question is who wanted us to find them, and why. As the boat docked at a private slip, Eleanor noticed Jonathan wince, his hand going to his side. You're hurt, she said, instantly alert. Ricochet, it's nothing. But when he moved into the light, the blood stain on his jacket was unmistakable. That's not nothing. We need to get you to a hospital. No hospitals? His tone brooked no argument. Too many questions, too much publicity. There's a first aid kit in the cabin. Eleanor wanted to protest but recognized the stubborn set of his jaw. Fine, but I'm calling someone I trust, a doctor who won't ask questions. To her surprise, Jonathan nodded. There's a secure phone in the glove compartment of my car. Upper level of the marina. Silver Aston Martin. Of course you drive an Aston Martin, Eleanor muttered, helping him from the boat. Stay here. Try not to bleed out before I return. The parking area was deserted, the silver sports car easy to spot. Eleanor found the phone and was about to return when movement near the marina entrance caught her eye. A black SUV with tinted windows, moving slowly through the lot. Instinct made her duck behind a concrete pillar. The SUV stopped near Jonathan's car, and two men emerged, private security types with the unmistakable bulge of shoulder holsters under their jackets. Eleanor retreated silently, taking a circuitous route back to the dock. Jonathan had managed to move from the boat to a small boathouse, where he sat grimacing on a storage trunk. We have company, she reported quietly. Two armed men checking your car. Westmoreland's people. They must have tracked us. He attempted to stand, swaying slightly. You're in no condition to run. Eleanor made a quick decision. Give me the keys to your boat. I'll create a diversion while you call for backup. Absolutely not. I won't put you at further risk. With respect, Mr. Everett, this isn't a negotiation. She held out her hand for the keys. I've evaded insurgents in desert terrain. I can handle a couple of corporate thugs on familiar ground. Their eyes locked in a brief battle of wills. Finally, Jonathan handed over the boat keys and the secure phone. Speed dial 3, my head of security. Tell him Crimson Protocol and our location. Eleanor nodded. Lock yourself in and stay down until help arrives. Eleanor, his voice stopped her at the door. Why are you doing this? This isn't your fight. She thought of the medical innovations in the project files, of the soldiers who might be saved, of her son in a distant field hospital, making the same impossible choices her husband once had. Because your work matters, she said simply, and because I'm tired of watching from the sidelines while others take the risks that change the world. Before he could respond, she slipped out into the darkness. The speedboat's engine caught on the first try, the powerful craft responding instantly to her touch. Eleanor hadn't piloted a boat in years, but the muscle memory returned quickly. Weekends on Lake Havasu with her late husband, teaching Michael to water ski. She guided the boat away from the dock, lights off, moving slowly until she was 100 yards out. Then she hit the floodlights and gunned the engine, the boat leaping forward with a roar that shattered the marina's quiet. In her peripheral vision, she saw the two men running toward the sound. Perfect. Eleanor cut a wide arc, keeping the boat visible but maintaining distance. One man raised what looked like a rifle. She ducked as bullets peppered the water around her. The distraction was working. Now she needed to maintain it long enough for Jonathan's security team to arrive without getting herself killed in the process. She pushed the throttle forward, the boat skimming across the water like a stone. The men returned to their SUV, clearly intending to follow along the shore road. Eleanor allowed herself a grim smile. Let them chase. Every minute they spent pursuing her was another minute Jonathan's people had to reach him. The boat's navigation system showed a series of small islands ahead Angel Island State Park, uninhabited at night, with plenty of coves and inlets for concealment. She set course for the nearest one, cutting the lights as she approached. The island's shadow enveloped her, the boat's engine echoing against rocky shores. She reduced speed, navigating by moonlight into a small cove partially hidden by overhanging trees, killing the engine. Eleanor drifted into the shallows. The silence was sudden and complete, broken only by water lapping against the hull and distant foghorns. She checked the secure phone, no signal. The island's terrain must be blocking transmission. She'd need to move to higher ground or the other side of the island to call for help. Securing the boat, Eleanor waded ashore, the cold water shocking against her skin. The island was dark, its hiking trails barely visible in the moonlight. She oriented herself using the distant lights of San Francisco, then began climbing toward the highest point. The path was steep and rough, challenging even in daylight. Eleanor moved carefully, aware that a twisted ankle now could be catastrophic. Age had slowed her, but decades of hiking had kept her strong. At the island's peak, breathless but triumphant, she finally found signal bars on the phone. She dialed the number Jonathan had given her. A gruff voice answered on the first ring. Everett Secure Line. This is Eleanor Mitchell. Jonathan Everett is injured at Bayshore Marina, private boathouse. He said to tell you, Crimson Protocol. The man's tone changed instantly. Understood. Assets are 7 minutes out. Where are you? Angel Island. I created a diversion with Jonathan's boat. 2 armed men were pursuing. Stay where you are. We'll send extraction once Mr. Everett is secure. No, I'll make my own way back. Just get to Jonathan. She ended the call before he could argue, then studied her surroundings. The island's west side faced the Golden Gate Bridge, where ferries regularly passed. If she could reach that shore, she might signal a passing vessel. The descent was harder than the climb, the trail treacherous in darkness. Halfway down, Eleanor heard voices male, professional, searching. The pursuers had landed on the island. She froze, pressing against a tree trunk as flashlight beams swept the hillside below. They were methodically searching the trails, working upward from the shore. Eleanor assessed her options. Continuing downhill would lead straight to them. Going back up would eventually corner her at the peak. She needed a third option. The island had been a military installation during World War II. If memory served, old bunkers and ammunition stores honeycombed the hillsides, most sealed off, but some accessible to determined hikers. She began moving laterally along the hillside, searching for man-made structures among the natural rock formations. The voices grew closer, flashlights more frequent. Finally, she spotted it, a concrete entrance partially hidden by overgrowth. Eleanor squeezed through the narrow opening into absolute darkness. The air inside was stale but breathable. She used the phone screen for minimal light, revealing a short tunnel that opened into a larger chamber. Military graffiti from the 1940s covered the walls, along with more recent additions from urban explorers. Most importantly, the bunker had a second exit on the opposite side of the hill, exactly what she needed to bypass her pursuers. Eleanor worked her way through the musty darkness, trying not to think about the spiders and rats that surely inhabited the abandoned space. The far exit was partially collapsed, requiring her to dig through loose dirt and crawl on her stomach for the final few yards. She emerged on the island's western slope, the Golden Gate Bridge visible in the distance, its lights reflecting on the water. Below, a late-night ferry was approaching the island's main dock, the last public transportation of the evening. Eleanor checked her watch as she had perhaps 15 minutes to reach the dock before the ferry departed. Steep terrain and dense vegetation separated her from the landing, with no clear trail visible in the darkness. There was nothing for it but to forge ahead. She began picking her way downhill, using trees and rocks for handholds, grateful for the hiking boots she'd worn for what was supposed to be a simple information retrieval. Halfway down, disaster struck. A rock shifted under her weight, sending her sliding down a scree slope in a shower of dirt and stones. Eleanor tumbled painfully for 20 feet before managing to arrest her fall by grabbing a protruding root. She lay still, assessing the damage. Bruised ribs, scraped palms, possibly a sprained wrist, painful but not incapacitating. The phone had survived in her jacket pocket, along with a USB drive from the marina. The ferry's boarding call echoed across the water, 10 minutes remaining. Grimacing, Eleanor pushed herself up and continued downward, reaching level ground with 5 minutes to spare. She broke into a limping run along the shoreline, the ferry's lights guiding her through the darkness. At the dock, a board attendant was preparing to cast off. "Wait!" Eleanor called, summoning her most convincing smile despite her disheveled appearance. "Thank goodness I caught you." The young man eyed her doubtfully. "Ticket." "I seem to have lost it during my hike." She produced a $50 bill from her wallet. "But perhaps we can make an arrangement for the return journey." He hesitated, then pocketed the money. "Last ferry of the night. You're lucky." "Luckier than you know," Eleanor murmured, stepping aboard. As the ferry pulled away from Angel Island, she saw flashlights moving on the hillside where she'd been minutes earlier. Her pursuers had missed her for now. Eleanor found a seat in the ferry's deserted cabin and finally allowed herself to acknowledge the pain radiating through her body. At 58, running for your life took a greater toll than it once had. She checked the secure phone, a text message from an unknown number. "Package secure. Return to base when safe." Jonathan was safe. Then, relief washed over her, followed by the delayed reaction to danger-trembling hands. Racing heart, the metallic taste of fear in her mouth. What had she gotten herself into 2 weeks ago? She'd been an unemployed professor organizing rare books. Now she was fleeing armed corporate spies and military conspirators, carrying stolen data and nursing injuries from a desperate escape. Yet beneath the fear and pain, Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose, of making a difference, not just cataloging the differences others had made. The ferry docked in San Francisco just after midnight. Eleanor disembarked carefully, every muscle protesting. The secure phone vibrated with another message. "Car waiting at ferry terminal. Silver Lexus." She spotted the vehicle immediately, its driver a professional-looking woman in a dark suit standing beside it. "Ms. Mitchell," the woman asked as Eleanor approached. "I'm Sophia Chen, Everett International Security. Mr. Everett asked me to ensure your safe return." Eleanor allowed herself to be helped into the car's leather interior, sinking gratefully into the heated seat. "How is he?" she asked as they pulled away from the terminal. "Stable? Our medical team treated the wound superficial. Thankfully, he's more concerned about you." The drive passed in comfortable silence, the city's familiar landmarks sliding by like ghosts. Eleanor realized they weren't heading toward her cottage at Riverview Estate. "Where are we going?" "Secure location," Sophia replied. "Mr. Everett's orders. Your cottage may be compromised." They drove north across the Golden Gate Bridge, eventually turning onto a private road that wound up into the wooded hills of Marin County. Security gates opened automatically as they approached a modernist structure built into the hillside, its glass and stone exterior blending harmoniously with the natural surroundings. "One of Mr. Everett's properties," Sophia explained, "parking in an underground garage. Off company records, known to only a few trusted personnel." Eleanor was escorted through a sophisticated security checkpoint to a spacious living area where Jonathan Everett stood waiting, his side bandaged beneath an open shirt. His expression when he saw her was one she couldn't quite decipher: relief, concern, and something else entirely. "You look terrible," he said by way of greeting. Eleanor couldn't help but laugh, wincing at the pain in her ribs. "You're welcome for saving your life." His facade cracked then, a genuine smile transforming his austere features. "Yes, thank you for that." He gestured to a nearby medic. "Now please let Dr. Patel examine you before you collapse." As the doctor tended to her injuries, Jonathan filled her in on developments. His security team had arrived minutes after her diversion, extracting him safely. The armed men pursuing them were private contractors, not Westmoreland employees. Directly plausible deniability. "The USB drive," Eleanor reminded him, reaching into her pocket. "We haven't checked what's on it." Jonathan took it, inserting it into a heavily encrypted laptop. The drive contained a single video file, security footage from Everett International's research lab, dated 3 days before the explosion. The video showed Catherine Everett arguing heatedly with Victor Harrington in the lab. Though there was no audio, their body language suggested a serious disagreement. At one point, Catherine gestured emphatically toward the prototype equipment, while Harrington shook his head repeatedly. The confrontation ended with Catherine storming out. After she left, Harrington made a phone call, his expression calculating. "That doesn't look like two conspirators working together," Eleanor observed. "No," Jonathan agreed, his voice thoughtful. "It looks like my daughter was trying to prevent something Harrington was planning. Then why send her ID badge to infiltrate the company after the explosion? Perhaps she didn't." Jonathan replayed the footage, focusing on details. If Catherine suspected Harrington was sabotaging the project, she might have been investigating independently, which means someone may have used her credentials to frame her after that confrontation. Eleanor winced as Dr. Patel bandaged her ribs. "The question is, who left us this evidence, and why? Someone who wants us to know Harrington is involved, but can't come forward directly." Jonathan's expression darkened. "The problem is, without knowing their motives, we can't be certain this isn't another manipulation." Eleanor considered this. What would Catherine gain by exposing Harrington? Protection? Perhaps. If she's discovered something dangerous and fears for her safety? He closed the laptop, his expression troubled. "Or it could be an elaborate setup to gain my trust before striking again." "You don't really believe that." "I don't know what to believe anymore." Jonathan paced the room, his limp more pronounced after the evening's exertions. "For 15 years, I've focused on one goal: completing Caroline's work, honoring her memory by saving others. Now that I'm close to success, it seems everyone wants to either steal it or destroy it." "Not everyone," Eleanor said quietly. He stopped pacing, studying her with that unreadable expression again. "No, not everyone." After a moment, he continued, "There's something I haven't told you. Project Lazarus isn't just about brain injury treatment anymore. The neural interface we've developed has capabilities beyond medical applications." "What kind of capabilities?" "With the right modifications, it could potentially allow direct brain-to-brain communication, sharing of memories, experiences, even skills." His voice grew intense. "Imagine a surgeon in New York guiding a medic in a war zone through a complex procedure, not just verbally, but by temporarily sharing their knowledge and muscle memory." Eleanor felt a chill, or a military commander controlling soldiers like extensions of himself. "Yes," Jonathan's expression was grim. "That's why I've kept certain aspects of the research compartmentalized. Why I've refused military contracts that would have tripled our funding. And why someone's willing to kill for it." "Precisely." He sat beside her, his voice lowering. "Eleanor, I need to ask something significant of you. Something beyond our original arrangement." The intensity in his eyes made her wary. "What is it?" "I need to go underground with this research completely off the grid. Finish it where neither Westmoreland nor military interests can reach it." He paused. "I want you to come with me." "Me? Why?" "Because in less than 2 weeks, you've proven yourself more trustworthy and capable than people I've known for decades. Because your medical history background provides perspective none of my technical team possesses." He hesitated. "And because, frankly, You're the only person I'm certain isn't compromised. Eleanor considered his request carefully. Her cottage at Riverview now felt like a lifetime ago, though she'd slept there just that morning. This wasn't the quiet academic position she'd accepted. This was something far more dangerous and consequential. Yet she couldn't deny the pull of being part of something that mattered so profoundly, of using her knowledge not just to document history, but to help shape it. What about your company, your responsibilities? I've built contingency plans over the years. My COO can handle operations temporarily, and the board will accept a medical leave of absence after the accident at the lab. His gaze was steady. But I won't pressure you. This is your choice, with full knowledge of the risks. Before Eleanor could respond, a security alert sounded through the house. Sophia Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression tense. Sir, we have incoming vehicles. 3 SUVs, approaching fast from the main road. Jonathan was instantly alert. How did they find this location? Unknown, sir, but satellite shows they're armed and in tactical formation. Eleanor felt a surge of adrenaline cutting through her exhaustion. How long do we have? 5 minutes, maybe less. Sophia was already distributing weapons to the security team. Jonathan made a swift decision. Activate Protocol Echo. Full evacuation. He turned to Eleanor. I need your answer now. There's no middle ground anymore. Eleanor thought of her quiet cottage, her carefully organized life, the safety of academic obscurity. Then she thought of the soldiers who might be saved by this technology, of the risks Jonathan had already taken to keep it from becoming a weapon. I'm in, she said, rising despite her protesting muscles. What's the plan? Relief flickered across his face. There's a helicopter pad on the roof and an escape tunnel leading to a secondary location. We split up increases our chances that at least one of us makes it out with the research. I'll take the tunnel, Eleanor said immediately. They'll expect you to be with the more obvious escape route. Jonathan nodded, handing her a small, heavily encrypted tablet. Everything we need is on this. If we're separated, make your way to the address listed under Sanctuary. My people there will recognize this authorization code. He scribbled a sequence of numbers on a paper, which Eleanor memorized before destroying. Sir, Sophia interrupted. 2 minutes. We need to move. Jonathan hesitated, then reached for Eleanor's hand. Be careful. This isn't your battle, but I'm grateful you've chosen to fight it anyway. It became my battle when they shot at me, Eleanor replied with a wry smile. Besides, someone needs to make sure your filing system at the new lab isn't as disastrous as your library. His unexpected laugh broke the tension. God, you're remarkable. Caroline would have liked you. Before Eleanor could respond, security personnel were ushering them in separate directions, Jonathan toward the roof. Eleanor toward a concealed panel in the study that revealed a narrow staircase. The last she saw of him was his tall figure striding purposefully toward the upper level, the weight of 15 years' work and an impossible promise driving him forward. Then she was descending into darkness, the sounds of approaching vehicles fading behind her, carrying the future of neural medicine and possibly the next evolution of human conflict in a tablet clutched against her aching ribs. At 58, Eleanor Mitchell had expected to spend her remaining professional years in quiet academic pursuits. Instead, she found herself running through an escape tunnel beneath a Marin County hillside, pursued by forces that saw her as collateral damage in a high-stakes technological war. Somehow, improbably, it felt exactly where she needed to be. The escape tunnel beneath Jonathan's Marin County safe house extended for nearly a mile, its path lit by motion-activated emergency lights that cast eerie shadows on concrete walls. Eleanor moved as quickly as her injuries allowed, the tablet secured in an inner pocket of the jacket Sophia had given her. The tunnel ended at what appeared to be an abandoned ranger station in the state park, its weathered exterior concealing a sophisticated security system that Eleanor accessed using the code Jonathan had provided. Outside, the pre-dawn air was cool and misty. No signs of pursuit were visible, but Eleanor knew better than to linger. According to the tablet's encrypted map, The nearest safe location was a veterans rehabilitation center called New Horizon, approximately 2 miles east. Her body protested every step of the journey through the wooded terrain. At her age, 2 midnight escapes in one evening exceeded recommended exercise guidelines by a considerable margin. But the alternatives were far worse. New Horizon appeared as the sun breached the horizon, a sprawling facility nestled against the hillside, its modern architecture blending harmoniously with the natural surroundings. The grounds were immaculately maintained, with accessible pathways winding through therapeutic gardens. Eleanor approached the main entrance cautiously. The facility seemed peaceful, with no indication of the chaos she'd left behind. A discreet security camera tracked her movement as she reached the door. Before she could knock, the door opened, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man with close-cropped silver hair and the unmistakable bearing of career military. "Ms. Mitchell." His voice was deep and surprisingly gentle. "We've been expecting you. I'm Colonel James Reeves, retired. Welcome to New Horizon." He ushered her inside to a comfortable office where a medical team waited to treat her injuries more thoroughly. "Is there news of Jonathan?" she asked as a doctor examined her ribs. "Mr. Everett's helicopter departed successfully," Reeves confirmed. "His current location is compartmentalized for security reasons, but he asked me to assure you he's safe and proceeding with preparations." Relief flooded through her, followed by nagging questions. "How did you know I was coming? The evacuation was improvised." Reeves smiled slightly. "Nothing involving Jonathan Everett is ever entirely improvised. He's been preparing for various contingencies for years." The doctor finished her examination, confirming 2 cracked ribs and a sprained wrist, but nothing requiring hospitalization. As she applied more substantial bandages, Eleanor studied her surroundings with growing curiosity. The office walls displayed photographs of Jonathan with veterans in various stages of rehabilitation, some using advanced prosthetics that Eleanor recognized as Everett International designs. In several images, Jonathan was demonstrating physical therapy techniques alongside the professionals, not as a visiting dignitary, but as someone intimately familiar with the work. "You seem surprised," Reeves observed, following her gaze. "I knew Jonathan funded veterans programs, but this seems more personal." Reeves considered her thoughtfully. "How much has he told you about his military service?" "Vietnam, MASH unit, injured by a mine." She gestured to her leg, mimicking Jonathan's limp. "That's the official version." Reeves moved to a secure cabinet, retrieving a file with classified markings. "Jonathan believes you need to understand what you're involved in. This provides context." The file contained military records and photographs that told a very different story than the corporate biography Eleanor had researched. Jonathan Everett hadn't been merely a MASH unit doctor. He'd been part of an elite medical team attached to special operations, developing field techniques for treating traumatic injuries in remote locations. "The work they pioneered saved countless lives," Reeves explained, "but it came at a cost. Their unit was captured during a mission near the Cambodian border, held for 7 months under difficult conditions." The clinical language didn't disguise the reality documented in debriefing reports. Torture, psychological experimentation, extreme physical deprivation. Victor Harrington was captured with him, Eleanor realized, finding his name in the reports. Yes, they were the only survivors from their unit. Reeves's expression darkened. Their experiences shaped them differently. Jonathan channeled his trauma into healing innovation. Harrington's path has been more complex. Complex how? Reeves hesitated. "That's not my story to tell. But I will say that trauma changes people in ways that aren't always visible. Sometimes the damage emerges decades later, triggered by events that echo past experiences." Eleanor considered this new information, reassessing her understanding of Jonathan, his driven perfectionism, his reluctance to trust, his commitment to neural regeneration technology. "This facility," she gestured around them, "it's more than a typical rehabilitation center, isn't it? New Horizons specializes in veterans with traumatic brain injuries and PTSD resistant to conventional treatment." Reeves led her through a secure door to a research wing. We've been an unofficial testing ground for early versions of Project Lazarus. The research area contained advanced medical equipment and monitoring systems far beyond standard rehabilitation facilities. Through observation windows, Eleanor saw patients working with therapists using neurofeedback systems she recognized from Jonathan's research files. These veterans volunteered for experimental protocols, Reeves explained. Many had exhausted all conventional options. The results have been remarkable. He showed her outcome data on a secure terminal, cognitive function improvements, PTSD symptom reduction, even partial memory restoration in cases previously considered hopeless. This is why Jonathan refused to weaponize the technology. Eleanor understood suddenly. He's seen firsthand what happens when medical innovations become military assets. Precisely, and why certain interests are determined to acquire it by any means necessary. Reeves's expression grew grave. Which brings us to why you're here. Jonathan asked me to show you something, or rather, someone. He led Eleanor to a private room in the facility's secure wing. Inside, a young woman sat by the window, her profile hauntingly familiar. Ms. Mitchell, Reeves said quietly. Meet Catherine Everett. Jonathan's daughter turned, her expression wary. In her early 30s, she had her father's intensity and something of her mother in the arch of her brows and the set of her jaw. So you're the librarian who's been helping my father, Catherine said, her voice holding a trace of her father's authority. He must trust you a great deal to send you here. I wasn't aware he had, Eleanor replied honestly. I thought I was following evacuation protocols. Catherine's smile was knowing. My father never leaves anything to chance. If you're here, it's because he wanted you to meet me before you commit further to his cause. Reeves excused himself, leaving the women alone. Eleanor took the seat Catherine offered, noting the younger woman's careful movements, someone recovering from recent injury. You're supposed to be working for Westmoreland, Eleanor said. Yet here you are in your father's facility. I am working for Westmoreland. Officially, Catherine's gaze was direct, challenging. Unofficially, I've been investigating connections between Victor Harrington, certain military contractors, and a shadow investment group called Prometheus Initiative. She activated a tablet, displaying research that mirrored Eleanor's own academic style, meticulously organized, cross-referenced, with multiple verification sources. 3 years ago, I discovered discrepancies in research funding allocations at Everett International. Money officially designated for Project Lazarus was being diverted to unlisted projects. Catherine scrolled through financial records. When I brought this to my father's attention, he dismissed my concerns, believing I was simply creating problems because of our difficult relationship. So you took a position with his chief competitor to continue your investigation. It provided access and resources I couldn't get otherwise. Westmoreland has its own intelligence on Everett International, including monitoring of Harrington, whom they've been trying to recruit for years. Catherine revealed what she'd discovered, a complex conspiracy involving Harrington, elements within the Department of Defense, and private military contractors. They weren't interested in Project Lazarus as medical technology, but as the foundation for a neural control system with military applications. Harrington has been developing a parallel version of my father's work, one designed specifically for battlefield implementation. Catherine's expression hardened. Imagine soldiers linked in a neural network, controlled by a central commander. No fear, no hesitation, no moral qualms about following orders. Mind control, Eleanor said, the implications chilling her. They prefer neural cohesion enhancement. But yes, essentially, Catherine showed her classified military documents with development timelines and implementation strategies. They need my father's interface design to complete the system. When he refused military contracts, they decided to take what they needed by other means. The lab explosion, an attempt to destroy research they couldn't steal and force my father to start fresh under their supervision. Catherine's voice grew bitter. Harrington has convinced his military partners that my father's humanitarian concerns are a weakness that makes him unreliable. They want the technology without the ethical constraints he's built into it. Eleanor studied Catherine, noting the tension in her posture, the hyper-vigilance of someone who's been under threat. Why are you telling me this? Why not go public with what you know? With what evidence, financial irregularities I uncovered by unauthorized access classified military documents I shouldn't possess? Catherine shook her head. Besides, Prometheus has operatives throughout government oversight agencies. Previous whistleblowers have been discredited or worse. Then why involve me? Catherine's expression softened slightly. Because my father trusts you, and because I need someone on the inside of whatever he's planning. Someone who understands what's at stake beyond the technology itself. She reached for a small case on the table, removing a neural monitoring device similar to those Eleanor had seen in the research wing. 3 weeks ago, I underwent an experimental treatment using an early prototype of Project Lazarus. Catherine's hand trembled slightly. I was attacked after confronting Harrington, a mugging that left me with a traumatic brain injury. The official prognosis was permanent cognitive impairment. Eleanor felt a chill. Your father used his own technology to treat you against established protocols. Yes, it was partially successful. Catherine tapped her temple. I still have deficits, memory gaps, processing delays, but I'm functional enough to continue my work, which makes me dangerous to Prometheus. And your father doesn't know you're investigating Harrington. He knows parts, not everything. Catherine leaned forward. My father is brilliant but single-minded. He sees Project Lazarus as his redemption for failing to save my mother. He can't conceive that his oldest friend and colleague could betray him so completely. Eleanor absorbed this new information, reevaluating everything she'd experienced since accepting the position at Riverview Estate. She'd walked into a complex web of betrayal, technological warfare, and family drama that had been unfolding for years. What do you want from me? She asked finally. Be his conscience, Catherine said simply. In his determination to complete this work, my father might make compromises he'll regret. He listens to you. I've seen the security footage. Use that influence to ensure Project Lazarus remains a healing technology, not a weapon. Before Eleanor could respond, Colonel Reeves returned, his expression tense. We need to move. Surveillance has detected unusual drone activity in the area. Catherine gathered her materials with practiced efficiency. Use the northwest exit. I'll take the emergency tunnel. Where are you going? Eleanor asked. Back to Westmoreland. My absence would be suspicious. Catherine handed Eleanor a secure communications device. This connects directly to me, encrypted and untraceable. Use it if you discover anything about Prometheus or if my father's in immediate danger. As Catherine prepared to leave, she paused. Ms. Mitchell Eleanor, my father hasn't trusted anyone since my mother died. The fact that he's brought you this far means he sees something exceptional in you. Don't waste that influence. After she departed, Reeves escorted Eleanor to an unmarked SUV with tinted windows. Where are we going? She asked as they drove away from New Horizon. To join Jonathan at the new research facility, approximately 3 hours from here. Sure. Reeves navigated through back roads, avoiding main highways. He's assembled a small team of trusted researchers to complete the final phase of Project Lazarus. And where exactly is this facility? Reeves glanced at her, his expression apologetic. That information is compartmentalized until we're closer. Security protocol. Eleanor sat back, watching the landscape change as they headed inland, away from the coast and deeper into California's less populated regions. The events of the past 24 hours had transformed her understanding of Jonathan Everett and the project she'd agreed to support. Not just a medical breakthrough, but potentially a new frontier in human cognition, or in the wrong hands. The most invasive form of control ever developed. The responsibility was overwhelming. She thought of her son Michael, treating combat injuries in a distant war zone with limited resources. What would he make of technology that could save his patients, but might also be perverted into creating more efficient ways to create those injuries? The ethical questions were profound, with no simple answers. But one thing was increasingly clear: her role had evolved far beyond cataloging medical history. She was now part of a small group determined to ensure that history took the right path forward. As the SUV wound through increasingly remote terrain, Eleanor made a decision. She would help Jonathan complete Project Lazarus as he intended it, a healing technology, but she would also remain vigilant, watching for the compromises Catherine had warned about. The tablet Jonathan had given her contained the culmination of 15 years' work, a potential revolution in neuroscience. Whether that revolution became a blessing or a curse might depend on the choices made in the coming days. And perhaps, improbably, on the influence of a 58-year-old medical historian who had stumbled into the center of a technological storm. The unmarked SUV finally stopped at sunset before a nondescript entrance built into a hillside, camouflaged by native vegetation and designed to be invisible from aerial surveillance. Eleanor had lost track of their exact location hours ago, somewhere in the Sierra Nevada foothills, remote enough that they hadn't passed another vehicle in over an hour. "We're here," Colonel Reeves announced, activating a hidden control panel disguised as a rock formation. A section of the hillside slid open, revealing a vehicle tunnel. "Welcome to Sanctuary." As they drove into the concealed facility, Eleanor was struck by the contrast between its unremarkable exterior and the sophisticated interior that unfolded before them. The tunnel opened into a large underground parking area where several vehicles were already stationed, including a helicopter being serviced by technicians. "How long has this place existed?" she asked, noting the polished concrete floors and state-of-the-art security systems. "Jonathan began construction 5 years ago. Officially, it's a private data storage facility for Everett International's most sensitive intellectual property." Reeves led her through a biometric security checkpoint. "Unofficially, it's designed to function as a completely self-sufficient research center for up to 6 months without external contact." They descended in a glass elevator that offered views of multiple underground levels, living quarters, hydroponics gardens, medical facilities, and at the lowest level, a research wing that rivaled anything Eleanor had seen at the company's headquarters. Jonathan Everett was waiting for them when the elevator doors opened, his tall figure silhouetted against the blue glow of medical imaging screens. He turned at their approach, the lines of exhaustion on his face softening slightly when he saw Eleanor. "You made it," he said simply, the relief in his voice unmistakable. His gaze swept over her bandaged wrist in the careful way she moved. "How are your injuries? Less severe than your security breach, I imagine." Eleanor studied him in return, noting the fresh bandage visible beneath his partially unbuttoned shirt. "You should be resting that wound, not setting up a new research facility." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I see you've met my daughter. Catherine is not what I expected." "Few people are, in my experience." Jonathan gestured for them to follow him into a conference room where digital displays showed project timelines and neural mapping simulations. "I assume she told you about her investigation into Harrington. And about Prometheus Initiative?" Eleanor took the seat he offered, grateful to rest her aching body. "She believes you're too close to see Harrington clearly." "Perhaps I was." Jonathan's expression darkened. "But recent events have clarified certain inconsistencies I've been unwilling to confront." He activated a central display showing Victor Harrington's personnel file and military record. "Victor and I survived experiences in Vietnam that forged a bond I thought unbreakable. When we returned, he helped me build Everett International from nothing. For decades, I trusted him without question." Jonathan's voice remained controlled, but Eleanor could hear the underlying pain of betrayal. "Now I discover he's been systematically undermining my work, corrupting my research for military applications I explicitly rejected." Catherine mentioned parallel development, a version of Project Lazarus designed for neural control rather than healing. "Yes, using my core technology to create something that violates everything I believe about medical ethics and human autonomy." Jonathan's hands clenched. The prototype that was destroyed in the lab explosion contains safeguards specifically designed to prevent such applications limitations hard-coded into the system that would make weaponization impossible. And now those safeguards are gone. Eleanor understood. Giving Harrington the opportunity to rebuild the system without them? Which is why we must complete our work here before he can finish his version. Jonathan expanded the display to show the current team 12 specialists in neurology, computer science, and biomedical engineering, all with long-standing connections to Jonathan, but none currently employed by Everett International. These are people I trust implicitly, each recruited personally and brought here under the strictest security protocols. Together, we represent the only hope of completing Project Lazarus as it was intended, a healing technology with built-in ethical constraints. Colonel Reeves, who had been silent during their exchange, spoke up. Ms. Mitchell, Jonathan asked me to offer you a formal position within the project. Your historical knowledge of medical innovation provides perspective. Our technical specialists lack. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. I'm hardly qualified to contribute to cutting-edge neuroscience. You're exactly qualified, Jonathan countered. Throughout medical history, the most significant breakthroughs have come when someone stepped back from technical details to ask fundamental questions about purpose and application. He pulled up images of the original journal she'd found in his library, the Vietnam field notes with their improvised surgical techniques. When I developed these procedures, I wasn't thinking about advancing medical science. I was trying to save 19-year-old kids with limited resources in hostile conditions. His voice grew passionate. That perspective, the human purpose behind the technology, is what's missing from Harrington's approach. It's what you naturally bring to any discussion. Eleanor considered his offer carefully. The rational decision would be to walk away to find a secure location far from corporate espionage and military conspiracies, returning to the quiet academic life she'd planned. But that life suddenly seemed hollow compared to the work unfolding here. This technology could transform treatment for patients like those her husband had lost on battlefields, like those her son still fought to save in conflict zones around the world. I'll stay, she said finally, but I want complete transparency about the project, its capabilities, and its limitations. No compartmentalization where ethical considerations are concerned. Jonathan nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. Agreed. You'll have unrestricted access to all aspects of the research. And one more condition. Eleanor met his gaze directly. When this is finished, we find a way to neutralize whatever Harrington is building, not just completing our version, but actively preventing the weaponized application. For a moment, tension filled the room. Then Jonathan extended his hand across the table. You have my word. As they shook hands, Eleanor felt the weight of the commitment she'd just made, not just to a research project, but to ensuring that a potentially world-changing technology emerged as a force for healing rather than control. Now, Jonathan said, his tone lightening slightly, perhaps you should see your quarters and rest. Tomorrow will be demanding. Colonel Reeves escorted her to a surprisingly comfortable apartment on the residential level, equipped with everything she might need for an extended stay, including clothes in her size. Jonathan had these prepared after your first week at Riverview, Reeves explained, noting her surprise. He said you passed some tests involving his organizational system. Eleanor smiled despite her exhaustion. I reorganized his library against explicit instructions. That sounds like Jonathan testing people by seeing if they'll challenge him when necessary. Reeves paused at the door. For what it's worth, Ms. Mitchell, your presence here matters. Jonathan respects few people's opinions. Yours appears to be one of them. After he left, Eleanor explored the apartment, finding, to her amusement, a small collection of medical history texts she'd mentioned admiring during her work in Jonathan's library. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her unexpectedly. She showered carefully, mindful of her bandaged ribs, then settled on the bed with the tablet Jonathan had given her during their escape. It contained the complete Project Lazarus files, including video of early trials, patient outcomes, and the theoretical framework underlying the neural interface. The technology was even more revolutionary than she'd initially understood. By combining nanoscale robots with adaptive AI and precise electromagnetic stimulation, the system could map damaged neural pathways and essentially teach the brain to rebuild them first by creating temporary artificial connections, then by stimulating the growth of new natural connections. The implications went far beyond traumatic injury treatment. Properly developed, this technology could transform care for stroke victims, patients with neurodegenerative diseases, even certain psychiatric conditions previously considered untreatable. But the military applications were equally evident, particularly in the section labeled Theoretical Extensions. With modifications, the same technology that helped injured brains rebuild connections could potentially create artificial connections between healthy brains, allowing direct communication, shared sensory experiences, even temporary skill transfer. Eleanor could see why certain interests were willing to kill for this technology. The tactical advantages of soldiers linked in a neural network, sharing information and skills instantaneously, would transform warfare. The ethical implications were staggering. As she read deeper into the technical specifications, her eyelids grew heavy. She fought to stay awake, determined to understand the full scope of what she'd committed herself to. But exhaustion finally claimed her. The tablet slipped from her fingers as she drifted into restless sleep. Her dreams filled with neural pathways and shadowy figures, pursuing her through endless tunnels. Eleanor woke to a gentle chime from the apartment's communication system. A glance at the bedside clock showed she'd slept nearly 10 hours, her body's demand for recovery after the previous day's ordeal. "Miss Mitchell," a voice announced. "Dr. Everett requests your presence in Lab 3 when you're ready." She dressed in the practical clothes provided, dark slacks and a simple blue blouse that fit surprisingly well, and made her way to the research level. Her ribs protested every movement, but the pain was manageable with the medication Dr. Patel had prescribed. Lab 3 occupied the heart of the research wing, its curved walls lined with neural imaging equipment and diagnostic stations. In the center stood a modified version of the device Eleanor had seen destroyed in the explosion sleeker. More refined, but recognizably the same technology. Jonathan was deep in conversation with a petite woman in her 60s, both of them studying a holographic brain scan projected above a conference table. He looked up as Eleanor entered, gesturing for her to join them. "Eleanor, this is Dr. Mei-Lin Chen, the foremost expert in regenerative neurology and my partner in developing Project Lazarus since its inception." His tone held genuine respect. "May, this is Eleanor Mitchell, the medical historian I told you about." Dr. Chen's handshake was firm, her assessment frank. "Jonathan says you challenged his organizational system and then saved his research from armed pursuers. Impressive for a historian." "I've had an unconventional career path," Eleanor replied dryly. "Haven't we all?" Dr. Chen's smile was quick but warm. "Jonathan believes your perspective will be valuable as we approach the integration phase. I hope he's right. We have precious little time." She guided them to the central display, where a three-dimensional neural map rotated slowly, certain pathways highlighted in pulsing red. "This is our current challenge," Dr. Chen explained. "The nanobots can identify damaged pathways and create temporary bridges, but we're struggling with the transition to natural regrowth. The artificial connections become a crutch the brain relies on rather than a scaffold for rebuilding." Eleanor studied the display, recognizing the pattern from historical cases she documented. "It reminds me of early prosthetic developments after World War II. The devices that worked best weren't the most technically advanced, they were the ones designed to work with the body's natural healing processes rather than replace them." She described several historical cases where medical innovation had initially seemed to fail, only to succeed when redesigned to support natural healing rather than substitute for it. "The body wants to heal itself," she concluded. "Sometimes technology gets in the way of that basic drive." Dr. Chen looked thoughtful. "We've been approaching this as an engineering problem, how to make better artificial connections. Perhaps we should be focusing on how to make temporary connections that encourage natural growth and then gracefully disappear. Like dissolving sutures, Jonathan said, catching the concept immediately. They hold the wound closed just long enough for natural healing to take over. The three of them spent the morning exploring this new approach, with Eleanor providing historical examples of adaptive medical technologies, while Jonathan and Dr. Chen translated the concepts into modifications for the neural interface. By mid-afternoon, they had developed a promising new protocol, one that used biodegradable nanobots programmed to create temporary neural bridges that would gradually transfer function to the brain's natural regrowth mechanisms. This could work, Dr. Chen said, reviewing the simulations. The degradation timeline aligns perfectly with the brain's natural neuroplasticity cycle. Jonathan nodded, his expression showing cautious optimism. Prepare a prototype for testing. I want to run a full simulation before implementing any changes to the physical system. As Dr. Chen left to supervise the modifications, Jonathan turned to Eleanor. Thank you. We've been so focused on technological solutions that we missed the historical precedent. That's why cross-disciplinary perspectives matter, Eleanor replied. The problems we face today rarely have entirely new solutions. Jonathan smiled slightly. A lesson I should have learned long ago. He gestured toward the facility's small cafeteria. Join me for lunch. You must be hungry. Over a surprisingly good meal, their conversation shifted to more personal territory. Jonathan asked about her academic career, her work with military hospitals, and eventually, her family. You mentioned a son, he said, pouring her a cup of coffee. Is he in medicine like his father? Michael is a trauma surgeon with Doctors Without Borders, Eleanor confirmed. Currently stationed near the Syrian border, though operational security means I rarely know his exact location. That must be difficult. It is, but he's doing important work. She sipped her coffee, considering how much to share. After his father died, Michael became determined to continue James's mission saving lives in conflict zones where most doctors won't go. And did you share that calling? I chose a different path, documenting medical innovations so they wouldn't be lost or forgotten. Eleanor set down her cup. Someone needs to remember how we got here, what worked, what failed, and why. Otherwise, we just keep reinventing the wheel or repeating catastrophic mistakes. Jonathan studied her with new interest. Is that why you accepted the position at Riverview? To document my collection? Partly, but mostly because I needed work after UCLA eliminated my department. She smiled wryly. The history of medicine is apparently less valuable than expanded administrative offices. Their loss, my gain. Jonathan hesitated, then added, I hope you know that regardless of how this situation resolves, you'll always have a position with me if you want it. The sincere offer touched her. Thank you. Though I imagine your board of directors might have questions about hiring a librarian who's assisted in corporate espionage and gone into hiding with proprietary technology? His unexpected laugh transformed his usually stern features. I'd pay good money to see that board meeting. Their moment of connection was interrupted by an urgent message on Jonathan's secure phone. His expression darkened as he read it. Trouble. Eleanor asked, Catherine, she's been placed on administrative leave at Westmoreland after security footage allegedly showed her accessing restricted files. He stood abruptly. This is Harrington's move against her. We need to extract her before one alarm cut through the facility. Red emergency lights flashing in the corridors. Security breach, the automated system announced. Unknown aircraft approaching restricted airspace. Jonathan was immediately in motion, Eleanor following as he strode toward the command center. Colonel Reeves met them halfway, his expression grim. 3 helicopters, military grade but unmarked. ETA 4 minutes. Prometheus, Jonathan said. How did they find us? Unknown, sir. But they're coming in fast and armed. Reeves led them to a monitoring station where radar showed the approaching aircraft. I recommend immediate evacuation protocol. Jonathan made a swift decision. Begin evacuation for non-essential personnel. Research team stays to complete the final integration. We're too close to abandon now. Sir, With respect, we can't defend against a force that size. We don't need to defeat them, just delay them. Jonathan turned to Eleanor. This facility has a hidden sublevel, accessible only through my private lab. The most critical components of Project Lazarus are already there, along with an escape route even Harrington doesn't know about. What about the research team? Eleanor asked. They're vulnerable. That's why I need you to lead them out through the secondary exit once they've completed the integration. Jonathan's voice was calm but urgent. Reeves and I will create a diversion, making it appear that we're evacuating with the core technology through the main escape route. The plan was risky but logical. Eleanor nodded her agreement as facility personnel mobilized around them, securing equipment and preparing for evacuation. Meet me in my private lab in 20 minutes, Jonathan instructed. Dr. Chen knows what needs to be transferred. Help her complete the essential work, then get everyone out. As he turned to leave, Eleanor caught his arm. Jonathan, be careful. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise. Perhaps at her concern. I will. See you in 20 minutes. The next quarter hour passed in controlled chaos as Eleanor assisted Dr. Chen and her team in finalizing the integration protocol and transferring essential components to secure transport containers. This is everything we need to rebuild if necessary, Dr. Chen explained, sealing the last case. The prototype itself is too large to move quickly, but these core elements contain all our innovations. As they worked, Eleanor could hear the distant sound of helicopters growing louder. Evacuation alerts continued to sound throughout the facility, directing personnel to designated exit points. 18 minutes after leaving Jonathan, Eleanor led Dr. Chen and 4 key researchers to his private laboratory at the far end of the research wing. The room was empty when they arrived, its sophisticated equipment already powered down for evacuation. Where's Jonathan, Doctor? Chen asked, checking her watch anxiously. We need to access the sublevel, and only he has the authorization. Before Eleanor could respond, the facility's power flickered, emergency generators humming to life as the main supply was compromised. The laboratory door slid shut and locked automatically, sealing them inside. Perimeter breach, the security system announced, initiating containment protocols. Through the laboratory's small exterior window, Eleanor could see black-clad figures rappelling from helicopters onto the facility's roof, their movements precise and military in their efficiency. They're already inside, one of the researchers said, his voice tight with fear. We're trapped. Not yet. Eleanor moved to the laboratory's central workstation where a biometric scanner waited. Jonathan gave me emergency access after the incident at Marin. She placed her palm on the scanner, holding her breath as the system processed her credentials. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then the floor beneath the main workstation began to recede, revealing a spiral staircase descending into darkness. Quickly, Eleanor urged, ushering the team toward the opening. Bring only the essential cases. Dr. Chen directed the researchers, ensuring the most critical components were prioritized. As the last team member disappeared down the staircase, Eleanor heard the laboratory door beginning to override, the security protocol being hacked from outside. She was about to follow the others when her secure phone vibrated with a message from Jonathan. Diverted main force to helicopter pad. Catherine in danger. Westmoreland lockdown. Use Protocol Omega. Eleanor made a split-second decision. Dr. Chen, she called down the staircase. Complete the evacuation as planned. I need to find Jonathan. But the protocol, I'll catch up. Eleanor pressed the control that would reseal the sub-level entrance. Get everyone to safety. That's what matters most. As the floor panel slid back into place, concealing the escape route, Eleanor accessed the laboratory's security terminal. Protocol Omega was listed among the emergency options, a facility-wide system designed to protect intellectual property in the event of catastrophic breach. She activated it without hesitation, then moved to a ventilation shaft in the laboratory wall. Her years exploring historical medical facilities, many long abandoned and off-limits, had taught her that service corridors often provided access unavailable through main passageways. Removing the ventilation cover, She squeezed into the narrow shaft just as the laboratory door burst open, armed figures in tactical gear swarming into the room. From her hidden position, she could hear their communications. Lab secured, no personnel. Main target appears to have evacuated via helicopter pad. Secondary targets. Research team location unknown. Facilities data systems are purging some kind of scorched earth protocol activated. Eleanor smiled grimly. Protocol Omega was working destroying all digital traces of Project Lazarus, while preserving only the physical components now safely with Dr. Chen's team. She began navigating through the ventilation system, using the facility schematics she'd studied earlier to make her way toward the command center, where Jonathan had likely been coordinating the diversion. The shaft narrowed as she approached the central sections of the facility, forcing her to army crawl despite her protesting ribs. At 58, contorting through air ducts was decidedly not among her preferred activities, but desperation made an excellent motivator. Through periodic grates, she glimpsed the invading force methodically securing the facility, at least 20 operatives in unmarked tactical gear, moving with the precision of special forces training. These weren't corporate security or common mercenaries. This was a military operation disguised as private security. As she neared the command center, she heard familiar voices, Jonathan and Colonel Reeves, their tones tense but controlled. The research team, Jonathan was asking, successfully evacuated through the sublevel, Reeves confirmed. Dr. Chen reports they've secured all essential components. And Eleanor? There was a pause before Reeves answered. Unknown. She wasn't with the team when they reached the rendezvous point. Jonathan's curse was creative and heartfelt. She activated Protocol Omega. The system logs show her credentials. Smart move, Reeves said, but it means she's still in the facility. We need to find her before Harrington's people do. Eleanor was about to make her presence known when a new voice joined the conversation, one that chilled her blood. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Jonathan? Victor Harrington entered her limited field of vision, flanked by armed guards. Unlike the tactical team, he wore an expensive suit, his silver hair immaculate, his bearing that of a man in complete control. Victor, Jonathan's voice was cold. I see you've abandoned pretense entirely. Necessity, old friend, your stubbornness has forced my hand. Harrington moved to the command center's main console. Now, where is the prototype, the real one? Not the decoy you prepared for this eventuality. Destroyed in the evacuation, Protocol Omega includes physical fail-safes for critical technology. Harrington laughed softly. Always the chess player, thinking 3 moves ahead. But I know you too well, Jonathan. You would never destroy 15 years of work, not when it might still save lives. The work is already saved, distributed among trusted colleagues who will ensure it's used as intended, for healing, not for weaponization. Such a limited vision. Harrington shook his head in apparent disappointment. We survived hell together. Jonathan, we both saw what happens when technology stagnates, when innovation is constrained by outdated ethical frameworks. Is that how you justify betrayal, by pretending it's visionary? It's not betrayal to recognize potential you refuse to see. Harrington's voice hardened. Project Lazarus can transform warfare. Yes, but by making it more precise, more controlled, ultimately more humane. Soldiers linked in neural networks make better decisions, suffer less psychological trauma, complete missions with minimal collateral damage, and sacrifice their autonomy, their individuality, their basic humanity. Jonathan's disgust was palpable. You're not creating better soldiers. Victor, you're creating organic drones. Eleanor shifted slightly, trying to see more of the confrontation. The movement dislodged dust in the ventilation shaft, triggering an involuntary sneeze she couldn't quite suppress. The sound, though muffled, was enough. One of the guards looked up, spotting her through the grate. Sir, in the ventilation system. Everything happened at once. The guard fired at the shaft, bullets puncturing the metal inches from Eleanor's position. Jonathan launched himself at Harrington, while Reeves tackled the nearest guard. Eleanor kicked out the grate and dropped into the chaos below, landing awkwardly on her injured ribs. Pain lanced through her side, but adrenaline kept her moving. She grabbed a fallen weapon and swung it like a club at the guard turning toward her, connecting solidly with his temple. Jonathan and Harrington were locked in a struggle that belied their age, two Vietnam veterans whose combat training had never truly faded. Despite his injured side, Jonathan fought with the desperate strength of a man protecting his life's work. "Eleanor, go!" he shouted, momentarily gaining advantage over Harrington. "Get to the emergency exit." Instead, she moved to help Reeves, who was fending off two guards simultaneously. Her intervention was enough to give him the opening he needed, and together they managed to incapacitate both attackers. Alarms blared as the facility's security systems registered gunfire. Through the command center windows, Eleanor could see reinforcements converging on their location. "We need to move," Reeves urged, retrieving weapons from the fallen guards. "More incoming." Jonathan had pinned Harrington against the command console, his forearm pressed against the older man's throat. "You won't win this, Victor. Even if you kill us, the technology is beyond your reach now." "Perhaps." Harrington's smile was chilling despite his compromised position. "But Catherine isn't." Jonathan's momentary shock at the mention of his daughter gave Harrington the opening he needed. He broke free, simultaneously pressing a concealed button on his watch. The command center doors sealed instantly, locking out the approaching reinforcements but also trapping the four of them inside. "What have you done?" Jonathan demanded. "Insurance policy." Harrington straightened his jacket calmly. "This room is now isolated from the rest of the facility. The environmental systems will begin removing oxygen in approximately 3 minutes unless I enter the override code." "You'll die too," Reeves pointed out, raising his weapon. "That won't help," Harrington said, gesturing to the sealed room. "The system is hardwired, designed to protect sensitive information even from physical coercion. Shoot me, and you guarantee your own deaths." Eleanor watched Jonathan's face, seeing the calculations running behind his eyes. "What do you want, Victor?" "The same thing I've wanted for 15 years. Your complete neural interface design, without the ethical constraints you've built into it." Harrington checked his watch. 2 minutes, 40 seconds remaining. "And Catherine, where is she?" "Currently enjoying Westmoreland's executive detention suite, pending investigation for corporate espionage. Whether she remains there or faces more serious consequences depends entirely on you." Jonathan's expression was agonized. "I can't give you what I don't have here. The complete designs were evacuated with the research team. But the core algorithm, the one that makes neural bridging possible, is in your head. Jonathan, it always has been." Harrington tapped his own temple. "You never trusted the complete formula to anyone. Not even May." Eleanor realized with growing horror what Harrington was suggesting. "You want him to rebuild it for you, from memory." "Precisely. With Jonathan's willing cooperation, we can reconstruct the interface within weeks. Without it, we're looking at years of reverse engineering from incomplete data." Harrington checked his watch again. 2 minutes remaining? Jonathan looked at Eleanor and Reeves, his decision visible in his eyes before he spoke. "Get Catherine to safety. Complete the integration with Dr. Chen. The ethical constraints are embedded in the biodegradation sequence we developed this morning." "Jonathan, no!" Eleanor began. "There's no choice." His voice was calm, resigned. "I won't sacrifice you and Reeves, and I can't abandon Catherine." "A wise decision," Harrington said, entering a code on his watch. The sealed doors hissed as the environmental controls reset. "Cooperation has always been your most admirable quality, Jonathan." Armed guards entered as the doors opened, quickly securing Reeves and Eleanor while maintaining a respectful distance from Harrington. "Colonel Reeves and Ms. Mitchell will be escorted to a secure location until arrangements for Catherine's release are finalized," Harrington instructed. "Jonathan will accompany me to our research facility." "And if I resist," Jonathan asked quietly, "then Catherine faces charges of treason rather than corporate espionage." Harrington's smile was almost sympathetic. The evidence is quite compelling. Stolen military specifications, unauthorized contact with foreign entities, the kind of charges that disappear people into black sites. Eleanor watched helplessly as Jonathan was led away, his expression conveying a final message to her, a silent directive to remember their work, to ensure the ethical framework survived. As guards escorted her and Reeves in the opposite direction, she caught one last glimpse of Jonathan Everett, the proud CEO and brilliant innovator, reduced to a bargaining chip in a technological war he had tried desperately to prevent. And she made a silent promise this wasn't over. Not while she had breath in her body and the knowledge to complete what they'd started. The detention facility where Eleanor and Colonel Reeves were held proved to be a corporate retreat owned by a Prometheus Initiative shell company, comfortable but thoroughly isolated, nestled in the Sierras with the nearest town over 30 miles away. Their quarters were essentially luxury cabins, equipped with amenities but devoid of communication devices or computers. Guards maintained a professional distance, treating them as valued guests under protection, rather than prisoners, a facade that fooled neither of them. On their third day of confinement, Eleanor was escorted to a lakeside pavilion where Catherine Everett waited, looking pale but composed in casual clothes that didn't quite conceal the electronic monitoring bracelet on her ankle. "Miss Mitchell?" Catherine greeted her as the guards withdrew to a discreet distance. "I'm glad to see you unharmed." "Relatively speaking," Eleanor agreed, taking a seat across from the younger woman. "They released you from Westmoreland custody. Transferred is more accurate. I'm still under investigation for corporate espionage, but Harrington arranged for me to be released into Prometheus custody as a show of good faith to my father." Catherine's expression was carefully neutral, but Eleanor caught the underlying tension in her voice. "Have you seen Jonathan?" "Briefly. He's being held at their research facility about 10 miles from here." Catherine lowered her voice. "He's cooperating, rebuilding the neural interface components they need, but he's implementing modifications they won't detect until it's too late." Eleanor leaned forward with interest. "What kind of modifications?" "The same ethical constraints he built into the original, but hidden within systems they think are purely functional." Catherine's expression showed a daughter's pride. "My father is a master of redundant systems. He anticipated something like this might happen and prepared accordingly. But they'll test the interface before implementation. Won't they discover the safeguards?" "Not if they're disguised as performance optimizations." Catherine glanced toward the guards, then continued softly. "The constraints are embedded in the neural mapping algorithms. The system will appear to function normally. But when applied to create connections between healthy brains, it will intentionally fail in ways that appear to be technical limitations rather than deliberate safeguards." "Clever," Eleanor acknowledged, "but it only delays them. Eventually, they'll figure it out." "Delay is all we need." Catherine slipped a small object across the table, a memory card barely larger than a fingernail. "This contains location data for the research team and instructions for completing the legitimate version of Project Lazarus. Colonel Reeves knows people who can help you escape." Eleanor palmed the tiny card discreetly. "And you, will you come with us?" "I can't. My monitoring bracelet includes a vital signs tracker if I move beyond a certain perimeter. It triggers an alarm and injects a sedative." Catherine's smile was grim. "Besides, I need to remain as a connection to my father. They allow me to see him because they think it ensures his cooperation." "It does, doesn't it?" "Yes, but it also gives us a channel of communication they don't fully monitor." Catherine's voice dropped to a whisper. "The next phase is already in motion. Be ready tomorrow night." Before Eleanor could ask for clarification, guards approached, signaling the end of their meeting. Catherine squeezed her hand briefly, the gesture conveying both urgency and reassurance. That evening, Eleanor shared Catherine's information with Colonel Reeves during their permitted joint dinner in the main lodge. He received it with the measured calm of a man accustomed to covert operations. "I have contacts who can extract us," he confirmed quietly. "But we'll need a diversion to overcome the perimeter security." Catherine mentioned something happening tomorrow night. Reeves nodded. Jonathan has allies even Harrington doesn't know about. Military contacts who disagree with Prometheus's approach. Government officials concerned about unregulated neural technology. You think they're planning an extraction? Not exactly. Reeves sipped his water thoughtfully. More likely an official inspection of this facility under the guise of regulatory compliance. The kind of visit that requires all security personnel to be visible and accounted for. Creating our opportunity to slip away? Precisely. He outlined their escape route, a maintenance road leading to a Forest Service track where transportation would be waiting. Once clear, we rendezvous with Dr. Chen's team to complete the legitimate version of Project Lazarus. And Jonathan Catherine? Reeves's expression grew somber. That's phase 2. First, we secure the technology, then we recover our people. The next day passed with excruciating slowness, each hour stretching endlessly as Eleanor prepared for their escape. She gathered what supplies she could without arousing suspicion: energy bars from the breakfast buffet, a first aid kit borrowed from the lodge's emergency station, a map of the surrounding area casually removed from a hiking brochure. At sunset, she met Reeves for their usual supervised walk around the property's perimeter, using the opportunity to familiarize herself with the guard rotation and security cameras. The inspection team arrives at 21:00, he murmured as they paused to admire the mountain view. We move at 21:15 using the service entrance behind the boathouse. Eleanor nodded almost imperceptibly. What about the electronic locks? Catherine provided override codes in the data card. They'll work for exactly 3 minutes during the shift change. Their planning was interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor, Victor Harrington himself, stepping from a helicopter that landed on the retreat's helipad with a thunderous downdraft that whipped the lake into whitecaps. He approached them with the confident stride of a man accustomed to deference, 2 security personnel trailing at a respectful distance. Colonel Reeves, Ms. Mitchell. His greeting was cordial, as if they were colleagues rather than captives. I trust you're finding the accommodation satisfactory. Gilded cages are still cages. Victor, Eleanor replied evenly. He smiled, apparently amused by her defiance. A temporary necessity, I assure you. One that will end sooner than you might expect. Is that why you're here to release us? Reeves asked, his tone making clear his skepticism. In a manner of speaking, Harrington gestured toward the main lodge. Perhaps we could continue this conversation somewhere more comfortable. I have news I believe you'll find interesting. They followed him to a private dining room where a meal had been prepared, an elaborate dinner that suggested celebration rather than detention. Please sit. Harrington took the head of the table, waiting for them to reluctantly take their places before continuing. I wanted to share this moment with you personally. As of 2 hours ago, Project Lazarus has been successfully reconstructed. Eleanor felt a chill despite the room's warmth. Jonathan completed the interface. With remarkable efficiency, Harrington confirmed, pouring wine none of them would touch. His work has always been brilliant, but under proper motivation, he's exceeded even my expectations. And now, Reeves asked, what happens to him, to Catherine? That depends on you. Harrington set down his glass, his expression turning serious. Contrary to what you might believe, I'm not a monster. Colonel, I've known Jonathan for 40 years. I have no desire to keep him or his daughter confined indefinitely. Just long enough to weaponize his life's work, Eleanor said sharply. To realize its full potential, Harrington corrected. A potential Jonathan refuses to acknowledge due to outdated ethical concerns. He produced a tablet, activating a video feed that showed Jonathan in what appeared to be a laboratory setting, working alongside technicians on a sleeker version of the neural interface prototype. Your cooperation would simplify matters considerably, Harrington continued. Dr. Chen and her team remain elusive, but with your help, we could integrate their research with our progress, accelerating development significantly. And if we refuse, Reeves asked quietly, then Jonathan and Catherine remain our guests until the project is completed without your assistance, a matter of months rather than weeks. Harrington's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm offering a compromise that benefits everyone. Help us complete this phase of development, and you all go free once the technology is secured. Eleanor studied him carefully, recognizing the calculated manipulator beneath the reasonable facade. Why tell us this now? Why not continue as you were? Because tomorrow morning, this facility will be visited by a joint DoD-FBI task force investigating allegations of unauthorized research on controlled technology. Harrington seemed entirely untroubled by this development. Everything they find will be perfectly legitimate, a corporate retreat where valued consultants are developing next-generation medical technology. Eleanor and Reeves exchanged glances, both recognizing the implication. Their planned escape route during the inspection had been anticipated. You knew about the inspection, Reeves said. You've been monitoring our communications with Catherine. Of course. Harrington appeared almost disappointed by the obviousness of it. Catherine's monitoring bracelet does more than track her location. Did you really think I'd allow unsupervised contact between my primary leverage and potential escapees? He stood here, straightening his immaculate suit. You have until morning to consider my offer: cooperation and eventual freedom, or continued resistance and indefinite confinement. I trust you'll make the rational choice. After he departed, Eleanor and Reeves remained at the table, both aware that their conversation was likely being monitored. It seems our options have narrowed considerably, Reeves observed, his voice carrying natural disappointment that masked the calculation in his eyes. Indeed, Eleanor matched his tone. Perhaps we should reconsider our position, given the circumstances. Their verbal exchange continued in this vein, apparently accepting defeat while their expressions and subtle gestures communicated otherwise. When they finally returned to their separate cabins, both understood that their escape plan required significant modification. In the privacy of her bathroom, with the shower running to mask any sounds, Eleanor examined the tiny data card Catherine had provided. Beyond the location coordinates and technical specifications, it contained an additional file labeled simply Contingency. The file proved to be a message from Dr. Chen outlining an alternative extraction plan if the primary escape route was compromised. It included a single line that made Eleanor smile despite the gravity of their situation. Protocol Omega was not complete. Secondary systems remained viable. The mysterious reference became clear when Eleanor recalled the facility's schematics she'd studied during their brief time at Sanctuary. Protocol Omega had purged the facility's main databases, but Jonathan had maintained physical backups in isolated systems, including emergency communication protocols designed to function even if main systems were compromised. One such system had been installed in the retreat where they were now held, a failsafe Jonathan had implemented years ago when the property was first acquired as a corporate getaway. The access point was in the boathouse, disguised as a standard electrical panel. If she could reach it, Eleanor could activate a communication channel to Dr. Chen's team that Harrington's people wouldn't detect. The challenge was reaching the boathouse unobserved. Now that their movements were likely under heightened scrutiny, Eleanor spent a restless night considering options, finally settling on a plan that relied more on psychology than technology. By morning, she had prepared her approach, right down to the slightly defeated posture she adopted when meeting Reeves for breakfast. I've been thinking about Harrington's offer, she said as they sat at a window table overlooking the lake. Perhaps cooperation is our best option, at least temporarily. Reeves studied her over his coffee cup, quickly recognizing the performance for what it was. You think we should help them? I think we should appear to help them. She lowered her voice, though not suspiciously so. It would give us more access, more information about what they're really developing. A reasonable approach, he agreed, following her lead. Though I doubt Harrington will grant us significant access immediately. We could suggest a demonstration of good faith, perhaps reviewing their current research in exchange for insights from our work with Dr. Chen. Their conversation continued in this vein, establishing a narrative of reluctant cooperation that would justify their request for a meeting with Harrington later that morning. When they presented their proposal to him in the lodge's conference room, Harrington received it with calculated skepticism. A sudden change of heart. Miss Mitchell, I find that difficult to believe. Not a change of heart, Eleanor corrected. A recognition of reality. You hold the advantage. Fighting that accomplishes nothing. Besides, Reeves added, we've invested too much in this technology to abandon it now. If limited cooperation ensures its completion, even in modified form, that's preferable to letting it languish. Harrington considered this, his expression thoughtful. What specifically are you offering technical consultation? Eleanor said. I can provide historical context for the neural mapping algorithms that Dr. Chen refined based on earlier medical innovations. And I can advise on implementation protocols for the military applications you're developing. Reeves added, having overseen rehabilitation programs using early versions of the technology, I understand its practical limitations. Their offers were carefully calibrated, valuable enough to seem genuine, limited enough to protect the most critical aspects of Project Lazarus. After a moment's consideration, Harrington nodded. A reasonable starting point. I'll arrange for you to review our current progress this afternoon. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Consider this a probationary arrangement. Demonstrate genuine cooperation, and your circumstances will improve accordingly. As they left the conference room, Eleanor made her move a carefully timed stumble that sent her crashing into a side table, scattering decorative items and creating momentary confusion. I'm so sorry, she apologized, kneeling to gather the fallen objects. Clumsy of me. The guards moved to assist, their attention momentarily diverted. In that brief window, Reeves palmed the key card one of them had attached to his belt, a master access credential that would open any door in the facility. By the time order was restored, the theft had gone unnoticed, and they were escorted back to their cabins to prepare for the afternoon meeting. We have 4 hours, Reeves murmured as they separated. Make your preparations accordingly. The afternoon found them in a secure conference room, reviewing sanitized versions of Prometheus's research. The presentation was clearly designed to impress without revealing truly sensitive information, technical enough to seem comprehensive, limited enough to protect proprietary elements. Eleanor played her role perfectly, asking insightful questions that demonstrated her knowledge while carefully avoiding any suggestion that she recognized the ethical constraints Jonathan had hidden within the system. As the presentation concluded, she made her second move, requesting access to the lakeside for fresh air and reflection before dinner. The technical specifications are fascinating, she explained to their escort. But I process information better with some physical distance. A walk helps organize my thoughts. The request seemed reasonable enough, especially given their apparent cooperation. After checking with superiors, the guard agreed to escort her to the lakefront, maintaining discreet surveillance while allowing her the space she'd requested. Eleanor walked slowly along the shore, gradually making her way toward the boathouse that stood at the lake's edge. When she reached it, she paused, making a show of admiring the view while assessing the building's security. Beautiful evening, she commented to her guard. Does anyone actually use these boats? Corporate retreats mostly, he replied, relaxing slightly in response to her casual demeanor. Executives fishing, team-building exercises, that sort of thing. Mind if I take a look? I used to sail when my husband was alive. The guard hesitated, then shrugged. Stay where I can see you. The boathouse interior was dim and smelled of lake water and engine oil. Several small crafts rested in their slips, ranging from simple rowboats to an expensive speedboat. Eleanor moved casually among them, appearing to admire the vessels while scanning the walls for the electrical panel Dr. Chen had described. She found it partially hidden behind a stack of life preservers, an ordinary-looking service panel that would attract no special attention. With her back to the guard, who remained at the entrance, she quickly opened the panel and located the disguise switch described in Chen's instructions. A simple sequence, 3 toggles left, 2 right activated the emergency communication system embedded within the standard circuitry. There was no visible confirmation, but if Chen's instructions were correct, the system would now be transmitting their location on a secured frequency monitored by Jonathan's allies. Eleanor closed the panel and rejoined her guard, her mission accomplished without raising suspicion. "Find anything interesting?" he asked as they walked back toward the main buildings. "Just memories," she replied with a wistful smile that wasn't entirely feigned. "Sometimes I miss being on the water." The remainder of the evening proceeded according to Harrington's schedule, a working dinner, where they continued their performance of reluctant cooperation, followed by an early return to their cabins in preparation for the next day's official inspection. In the privacy of her room, Eleanor prepared for what she suspected would be a long night. She dressed in layers, selecting clothing appropriate for potential wilderness travel, and assembled what supplies she could without arousing suspicion if her room was checked. Shortly after midnight, a soft tap at her window alerted her that Phase 1 of their revised escape plan was in motion. She opened it to find Reeves crouched outside, dressed in dark clothing and carrying a small backpack. "Security systems compromised," he whispered. "We have a 15-minute window." They moved silently through the darkness, avoiding the main paths and using the forest edge for cover. The stolen key card provided access to a service gate at the property's northern boundary, the opposite direction from where any escape would be expected. Beyond the gate, a steep trail led into dense forest. They traveled quickly despite the difficult terrain, guided by the GPS coordinates in Catherine's data file. After an hour of hard hiking, they reached a small clearing where a weather-beaten SUV waited, its presence so ordinary it would attract no special attention from aerial surveillance. "Dr. Chen's people," Reeves confirmed, approaching the vehicle carefully. He tapped a specific pattern on the driver's window, receiving an answering sequence that confirmed their contact's identity. The driver, a young woman with the focused intensity of a dedicated researcher, nodded in greeting. "Colonel Reeves, Miss Mitchell, we need to move quickly. Sunrise in 4 hours." As they drove through the pre-dawn darkness on Forest Service roads, Eleanor studied the data Catherine had provided, focusing on the technical specifications for completing Project Lazarus. "Where are we going?" she asked. "University Research Facility in Oregon," the driver replied. "Registered under a conservation biology grant. Dr. Chen has established a temporary lab there with the essential components you helped evacuate. And the neural interface prototype, did any part of it survive?" "Enough to rebuild. Dr. Chen had the foresight to distribute key components among team members during evacuation." The driver navigated a particularly rough section of road. "What we lack now is the final integration protocol, the bridge between artificial and natural neural regeneration." Eleanor smiled, remembering their breakthrough discussion with Jonathan just before the Prometheus attack. "I can help with that. Jonathan and I developed a biodegradation sequence based on historical medical precedents." The driver looked relieved. "That's exactly what Dr. Chen hoped you'd say." As they crossed the California-Oregon border with the first light of dawn, Eleanor felt a complex mixture of emotions, satisfaction at their successful escape, concern for Jonathan and Catherine, who remained in Harrington's custody, and determination to complete the work they'd begun. The next phase would be even more challenging, not just finishing Project Lazarus as intended, but developing a countermeasure to the weaponized version Harrington was creating with Jonathan's coerced assistance. It would require everything they had learned, everything they had developed, and perhaps most importantly, the historical perspective that had guided their ethical framework from the beginning. At 58, Eleanor Mitchell had never expected to find herself at the center of a technological revolution that could transform human cognition. But perhaps that was exactly where she needed to be, a voice of historical wisdom in a race toward an uncertain future. As the sun rose over the mountains ahead, she began mentally composing the next chapter of medical history, one she wouldn't just document, but help create. In the quiet spaces between battles fought over the human mind, true courage reveals itself not in technological brilliance, but in the choices made when everything hangs in the balance. Jonathan and Eleanor, strangers, thrust together by circumstance, found themselves guardians of a future neither had imagined. What began with a fallen journal ended with fallen barriers between past and present, between professional distance and profound connection, between broken minds and healing possibilities. Their journey reminds us that innovation without wisdom becomes its own kind of weapon. that the most important firewalls aren't built in laboratories, but in our moral boundaries? We stand now at the same precipice they faced, where technology's reach extends into the most intimate sanctuary we possess, our consciousness. The question isn't whether we can connect minds, but whether we should, and to what purpose. The answer lies not in the brilliance of our inventions, but in the wisdom with which we wield them. For those who've walked through fire to protect what matters, the scars become not merely wounds, but maps to guide others home. In your own life, when faced with the choice between control and connection, between power and healing, which path would you choose? The truest revolutions begin in whispers, in the silent choices we make when no one is watching.